I love you. Hear me? Do you hear me? I love you.
Then why do you hold me like an enemy?
Our world is an inversion of what it should be. Instead of following the natural human impulse to cultivate this planet like a garden, capitalism is raping Mother Nature and turning her every ecosystem to shit. Industrial agriculture has thoroughly poisoned our farmlands and waterways. Every living thing now accumulates potentially cancer-causing levels of glyphosate. Thanks to Monsanto, there's no escaping it. Our heedless use of plastic is polluting our oceans and disrupting our endocrine systems. Chemicals that make plastics more flexible, called phthalates, also leach into human bodies, making men sterile while shrinking their genitals. At the current rate of fertility collapse, most men won't be able to produce sperm by 2045.
Sperm counts in the Western world could reach dangerously low levels.
Our endless wars, no matter how the war profiteers and mockingbird media journalists justify them, are yet another sure sign that we live in a destructive, criminal world that's largely owned and operated by psychopaths. Most of us, outside the predator class, seem to abide by a hazy set of ethical principles, like be a good neighbor. But we also tend to be lazy and willfully obtuse about how we're colluding in our own doom. We want to forget about our own small crimes or sins against nature and just have a nice life. But we can't say we're against war profiteering if we own stock in Raytheon or Lockheed Martin. We can't say we're against poisonous agricultural practices if we're buying synthetic, GMO-laden mystery meat from Whole Foods. We all have a tendency to spout hypocritical rationalizations as if they can excuse our civic disengagement and lack of critical thinking. But if men won't rise up, collectively, to save their own penises, then what will it take to get us to change our current trajectory towards self-obliteration? Are we willing to allow a bunch of privacy-invading, eugenics-obsessed technocrats and oligarchs to bifurcate the human species into a dominant ruling class and a sterile, obedient underclass of masked and locked-down dead serfs? Will we let ourselves be herded into smart cities, where we'll be perpetually monitored and geofenced in by a global biosecurity state? That's no longer science fiction. It's clearly what the predator class is aiming for, a neo-feudal, techno-fascist slave system that will commodify people and trade them, like coffee or soybeans, in human capital bond markets, where even genocide, perhaps especially genocide, can turn a profit for the bankers and hedge funds that issue those bonds and then bet against them. This amounts to a war against most of humanity, and we won't be able to win that war if we don't understand the strategies of the other side. From a spiritual perspective, I'm not even sure if winning is entirely the point. Some people refuse to give in to tyranny, no matter what the cost, because they're sovereign individuals who are free by divine authority. They can take cold comfort from Rilke's words in The Man Watching. Winning does not tempt that man. This is how he grows. By being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings. Alison McDowell had something to say about the looming threat of technofascism during the worldwide freedom rally held at New York City's Union Square on March 20th.
Yes, my name is Alison McDowell, and if you are familiar with my work, you can find more about it at my blog, rentsinthegears.com, and I have a YouTube channel under my name. I'm kind of a fire hose, so if it doesn't make sense, it's important, stick with it, you'll get it eventually, alright? We knew the age of surveillance capitalism was dawning, but none of us anticipated this trigger event that turned our world upside down a year ago March. We must work to transmute this profanity that has descended upon us into something sacred, a sacred, non-cybernetic future. That future is not one where we live in a planetary computer or as characters in a virtual reality simulation. That world is not a world of bar-coded life. That world is not one that is fueled by cyborg avatar capitalism. We see this choice. It is a choice between two paths, one green, one scorched. And we know that the choice we make, the stand we take today and every day moving forward will determine not just the course of our lives, but the lives of all other beings on this planet and those not yet born. Michael Bloomberg, Goldman Sachs, Stanley Druckenmiller, Tal Tudor Jones, and the rest of the hedge fund crowd have no right to predictively profile us, put us on social prescribing self-improvement pathways, track our compliance with wearable technology, and use that data to run pay-for-success deals profiting off social misery. Who do they think they are to impose digital identities like these health passes and package us as asset-backed securities? Tranches of impact investments, human capital data commodities, to be tracked as domesticated livestock through a spatial web of mixed reality. The Davos elite have no right to foreclose the futures of children. Their soulless smartness is no match for our symphonies, our songs, our dance, our poetry, our cuisine, our street art, laughing children, and warm embraces. Our destinies are too magnificent to fit on any puny blockchain ledger.
First it was endless war, now they want endless war on COVID. You think they're just going to let you get back to normal life and live it all in freedom after this? Not a chance. They love the power, they love the control, they love being the center of attention. They're not giving this up. Now they want vaccine passports to control who can go where, when. In England, they're talking about a government vaccine certificate to go to the pub. In New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo is handing out contracts to IBM for a Big Brother health passport system. In New Jersey, Rutgers University won't let students into classes without a vaccine certificate. And now, just argued in the Wall Street Journal that we need a digital rapid detection system, integrating information from all sources, including routine reports to health authorities from medical providers, data from contact tracing databases, digital surveillance apps. Just today, the Biden administration said they're working towards developing a new nationwide vaccine passport standard. On and on it goes. A nightmare, Orwellian infrastructure of control, an unprecedented, undemocratic power grab by big business, big government, big bureaucracy. No, no, no. Here to react, author of The End of America, a letter of warning to a young patriot, Dr. Naomi Wolf. So excited that you could join us tonight. I'm just going to hand it over to you. What do you make of what we're about to see?
Thank you, Steve. I'm really happy to be here. I am not overstating this. I can't say it forcefully enough. This is literally the end of human liberty in the West if this plan unfolds as planned. Vaccine passport sounds like a fine thing if you don't understand what those platforms can do. I'm CEO of a tech company. I understand what this platform does. It's not about the vaccine. It's not about the virus. It's about your data. And once this rolls out, you don't have a choice about being part of the system. What people have to understand is that any other functionality can be loaded onto that platform with no problem at all. And what that means is it can be merged with your PayPal account, with your digital currency. Microsoft is already talking about merging it with payment plans. Your networks can be sucked up. It geolocates you everywhere you go. Your credit history can be included. All of your medical history can be included. This has already happened in Israel. Yeah. And 6 months later, we're hearing from activists that it's a two-tier society and that basically activists are ostracized and surveilled continually. It's the end of civil society, and they're trying to roll it out around the world. And it is absolutely so much more than a vaccine pass. I cannot stress enough that it has the power to turn off your life or to turn on your life, to let you engage in society or be marginalized. And by the way, the last thing I'll say, IBM has a horrible history with Nazi Germany. Its subsidiary created a kind of precursor of this with punch cards that allowed the Nazis to keep lists of, again, a two-tiered society, Aryan and Jew, in such a way that they could round up Jews, round up dissidents, round up opposition leaders very, very quickly. It's catastrophic. It cannot be allowed to continue.
Vera Sharav, a Holocaust survivor and highly respected activist in the field of medical ethics, also shared her thoughts at the Worldwide Rally for Freedom, noting the similarities between our current pandemic push toward medical tyranny and the medical abuses that occurred in early Nazi Germany.
I was 3.5 years old when my world collapsed. Nazi propaganda demonized us Jews as spreaders of disease. We were stigmatized as a menace to public health. We were forced to wear a yellow Star of David to identify us so people could throw stones or whatever. We were evicted from our home, deported, and herded into a concentration camp where my father died of typhus, which was an infectious disease that was rampant in the unsanitary, overcrowded conditions of the ghettos and concentration camps all over. It's not enough to say never again. In the 1930s, the German people succumbed to totalitarianism. If we don't fight for our freedom, we will lose it, and it will happen again. That's right. And it'll be a global Holocaust. Our survival as free human beings is on the line right now. During the Holocaust, the corporate elite profiteered from every process. Every murderous process was profitable for them. The current repressive and fearful atmosphere has, of course, brought memories, very painful memories. To live to see again the fear and to know what is possible, what is probable unless we do something, is terrible. Isolation and mandatory masks are insidious psychological weapons. They demean our dignity as human beings. Mask mandates are the symbolic equivalent of the yellow star. The real virus, my friends, is eugenics.
Yes, it is.
Eugenics is the source of the evil. That is the ideology. That is a racist, elitist ideology that sees most of us, most of humanity, as being beneath them. They regard themselves as, the Germans called it Übermenschen.
just because you're rich doesn't make you cultured. Just because you're rich doesn't make you refined. Being rich means you're rich. Some rich people are just dicks.
Eugenics and public health are very closely aligned, both in their objective and in their enforcement measures. Both rely on police or military enforcement, and both legitimize the covert objectives of the ruling class.
To kill over 10 million excess people in a year, we don't need to invest nearly what we do in military preparedness. This is something where less than $1 billion a year on R&D, medical surveillance, standby personnel, cross-training the military so they can play a role in terms of all the logistics here. This can be done. The final solution, which is a year to 2 years off, is the vaccine.
Just to head off the conspiracy theorists, maybe we shouldn't call the vaccine the final solution. Maybe just the best solution. Okay.
Eugenics leads to apartheid, forced sterilization, euthanasia, and genocide. The most important lesson of the Holocaust is how medicine can be perverted from its healing, humanitarian focus to becoming an instrument of genocide. T4 was the first mass medical murder project in history.
In case you don't know, Operation T4 was another inversion, this time of the Hippocratic Oath.
In Germany in 1939, for the first time in the history of humanity, doctors would willingly participate in the deaths of their own patients. How did this happen? Science without conscience is but the ruin of the soul, wrote Rabelais. The Nazis considered disease to be a symptom of insufficient social discipline, as well as a lack of commitment to the community. Society was portrayed as a living organism that had to be protected from parasites and cancer cells. The people's community must be pure in order to achieve the ultimate goal, which was to preserve the master race. With their slogan, "You must be healthy for the people and the state," with their obsessive emphasis on youth, health, and work, the Nazis turned illness into a crime. In the psychiatric hospitals, films were made of those patients who exhibited the most striking physical anomalies. They were deliberately presented and lit in such a way as to elicit a sense of horror in viewers. As a result of this kind of propaganda, public opinion turned against the disabled. The Third Reich needed only children that were healthy.
Everybody had to be fit, physically and mentally. There was no room for anybody else. This was not a Nazi idea. This ideology, eugenics, racial hygiene, existed long before Hitler. The eugenicists in the 1920s in particular, and even before, had already prepared the ground. The German medical profession were only waiting for Hitler so they could carry out this incredible plan. If you couldn't perform to a certain standard, if you did not perform something worthwhile for society, then you had no right to live.
In the spring of 1939, Hitler gave orders to set up a program designed to eliminate people who were considered mentally or physically disabled. This operation was to be kept absolutely secret. Hitler put his personal physician, Karl Brandt, in charge of organizing it, together with Philipp Buhler, chief of the chancellery, who in turn appointed his deputy, the Nazi official Victor Brack, to implement the plan. Brack estimated that 70,000 people would have to be eliminated. In August 1939, an administrative structure was created to oversee this operation, and it was christened the Charitable Foundation for Institutional Care. It was set up in Berlin in a villa that had been confiscated from a Jewish family. The villa's address was Tiergartenstrasse 4, hence the code name given to this extermination program, T4. The T4 officials held the first of a long series of meetings in a room in the Chancellery.
This conference is the first time in the whole of history of mankind where doctors were plotting to kill their own patients, completely against the Hippocratic Oath.
A circular sent out by the Ministry of the Interior now required maternity hospitals and pediatric wards to report children under the age of 3 with any kind of malformation or mental disorder. The succinct one-page evaluation forms were read and annotated by doctors who never saw their victims. A plus sent them to their death. A minus spared their lives. And on September 1st, 1939, Hitler started the war. The last phase of Operation T4 could now be implemented. The process of eliminating the disabled began. At the psychiatric hospital in Gurdon, as well as in other centers, children were killed first, either by injecting them with an overdose of phenobarbital or by letting them starve to death. The program was soon extended, just as covertly, to include adults. In the summer of 1941, while Jews were already being rounded up and gunned to death in Eastern Europe, the officials in charge of the final solution were looking for an industrial method of mass extermination, and in so doing, they would make use of the experience gained by the T4 crews.
Without the full support of physicians, scientists, and nurses, the Holocaust, as it unfolded, could never have happened.
The first victims of the Holocaust were German medical doctors selected children whom they deemed unworthy of life. And the children were medically murdered in accordance with doctors' orders. Now get that, how perverted. Doctors' orders. We always think of doctors' orders as being for our benefit, to heal us, but it can be turned around. The pool of victims was expanded to the mentally ill, the disabled, and then the nursing home residents. More than 300,000 German children and adults were medically murdered under T4. In 2020, officials in the wealthiest nations in the Western world, Europe, Australia, the United States, and Canada, issued orders that essentially condemned nursing home people to death.
Arrest Cuomo!
Yes.
I'm getting there.
Yes.
Before Andrew Cuomo issued his executive order on March 25th, he predicted that the virus would be like fire through dry grass. The dry grass are the human beings. His order extinguished more than 15,000 New York nursing home residents. He lied and concealed the numbers. So I guess he knew that he was responsible. Guess what the corporate media did? The Media Academy awarded him an Emmy. Awarded him an Emmy for his performances, daily briefings they called them. It was propaganda.
What am I going to do with 400 ventilators when I need 30,000? You pick the 26,000 people who are going to die. It's disrespectful of people not to wear masks. And should there be sanctions? Yes. Yes. Because it is a public health emergency, and I think there should be a penalty. Because you could literally kill someone.
Every press conference sounds like he's shaking down a pizza parlor in Bensonhurst for protection money.
It is now my distinct pleasure to present the 2020 International Emmy Founders Award to Governor Andrew Cuomo.
The end is all that we have fixed.
Somebody had a plan.
culture. It's just toxic culture, which is another, again, psychological warfare strategy where you can debase the culture through degenerate media, right? That's a classic tactic. H.G. Wells talked about doing that.
I saw you asleep beside a wall, your skull inside a ball, your eyes blackened by the sound and the thought of God. Where should I hang my head? Where would you like for me to hang my head? One absence of truth, the one horrible thing I saw, what you truly wanted to become, and who you thought I was, the fall, the frame up runs deeper than the brain, goes all the way down those tracks. Everybody bow your head for the greatest inspiration, a complete contradiction of in this hole that we have fixed, we get further and further from what we must do. I know this, I know this, you know this, you know this. Beyond this hole that we have fixed, we get further and further and further from what we must do. I saw you outside that wall, your skull outside that wall, your eyes christened by the sound and the light of God.
I can't use what I can't abuse, and I can't stop when it comes to you. You're getting me out, but I'm back at your door. Like Joan of Arc coming back from war.
It might seem easier at the moment to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. But that seriously underestimates humanity's collective problem-solving abilities. We can't, however, solve complex, world-threatening problems unless we're allowed to discuss them freely. And the major social media platforms all seem determined to make sure that doesn't happen. They're acting in concert, like some monstrous mind control machine, disseminating propaganda that manipulates us ever closer toward technocratic totalitarianism, while censoring doctors, lawyers, and researchers who would expose their lies.
Propaganda, censorship, and fact-checkers control the narrative. Dissenting voices are demonized and silenced. Debate is not allowed. Why? What are they afraid of?
The truth.
The truth.
Got it.
The truth.
And it's not just big tech we're up against. There's also a strong undercurrent of fascism running through the U.S. federal government, with its omniscient intelligence agencies working in full partnership with Big Pharma, Big Media, the military-industrial complex, and all the other major corporate cartels.
It almost seems as if Adam Curtis got it right when he observed in his latest documentary, Can't Get You Out of My Head, that Hitler's Third Reich never really ended.
Horst Mahler and other radicals began to think that the problem was far deeper than just individual Nazis. That maybe the whole Nazi system had also survived and was hiding behind the facade of modern capitalism. They argued that the very system of industrial rationality and bureaucratic control that had made the Nazi state so efficient had simply mutated. It had been taken up by the victors, above all by America, and was now being used to run the new global capitalism and the multinational corporations that were ruthlessly exploiting what was called the Third World. Anything that stood in the system's way was bombed or burnt, with weapons created by the same rational industrial techniques that made the mass consumer goods. But the people in the West couldn't see this, because they had been led into a dream world that used mass consumerism and sexualized imagery to entrance and distract everyone.
Und zauberhaft schön. Die Randlosen. Strumpfhosen von...
In reality, it was an iron cage, designed to look like an open and free welfare state, a false state of peace that was built really on horror and war.
So alive in me, even just recalling it. I remember that I had gone so far and there was no turning back, that even if I had wanted to run, even if I had wanted to leave, I couldn't. It was like I was caught in something that I had no control over. I had absolutely no say-so as to what was happening there. I was just like a tool in the hands of the devil, is the only way I can put it.
Operation Paperclip is often cited as the U.S. intelligence program that brought the Nazi system to America. President Truman authorized the Paperclip program in 1946 to bring German scientists to work in America after the war, while specifying that it should exclude anyone who had been found to have been a member of the Nazi Party and more than a nominal participant in its activities. But when the War Department's Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency began conducting background checks on the scientists, they found out that all their top picks were ardent Nazis. Not wanting to send those scientists back to Germany, where they could be poached by America's enemies, the Office of Strategic Services brought the problem to the attention of their man in Switzerland, Alan Dulles, who was consulting with Dr. Carl Jung around that time and would later become the CIA's first and longest-serving civilian director.
As far as I know, we don't engage in assassinations and kidnappings and things of that kind.
Dulles teamed up with a high-ranking Nazi intelligence leader, General Reinhard Gehlen, and other like-minded individuals to scrub the scientists' dossiers of all incriminating evidence. And that's how we ended up with Werner von Braun, Roberta Struwwelder, Walter Dornberger, and all those Josef Mengele-inspired sadists who pitched in on whacked-out CIA umbrella projects like Operation Artichoke and MK Ultra. In my Crash Gordon series of novels, I suggested that the Nazi ideology of the paperclip scientists might have acted as a psychic contagion, infecting the quasi-autonomous hive mind, or egregore, of the CIA. The Germans even have a word for that sort of egregoric transmutation brought about by an ideological virus. They call it Weltanschauungskrieg, which roughly translates as worldview warfare. Correlation doesn't always equal causation, but it's interesting to note that the CIA was established when President Truman signed the National Security Act into law right after the famous wave of UFO sightings during the summer of 1947. Many of the CIA's earliest agents were recruited from the OSS, so packed full of members of the East Coast financial establishment that the acronym was jokingly said to stand for "Oh So Social." So essentially what you had with the founding of the CIA was a bunch of Nazis and Wall Street investment bankers and lawyers working together while rumors of a potential alien takeover swept the planet.
Whoa, did you see that wave?
Now, you talk about this black network. Let's follow up on this point. It's been argued that in a way, the drug money launderers, other people with the funds and money transactions, the arms merchants, they need a bank like BCCI. There is a market demand for it. Is that what you found? Well, not only did the drug dealers need a bank like this, the people moving capital flight, the people avoiding taxation, the people hiding corruption or bribery money, and intelligence agencies from both the Eastern and Western world needed this bank. I suppose if it wouldn't have been BCCI, it would have been somebody else.
I don't know about you, but whenever I learn something new about U.S. intelligence agency exploits involving bankers and lawyers hooking up with Nazis, or South American drug lords, Middle Eastern arms dealers, or billionaire child sex traffickers, I start to think about the problem of radical evil in this world. The ugly spirit, sinister forces, psychopathy, Satanism, Wetiko, demonic possession.
Like Lucifer has farted inside my brain.
Call it whatever you want.
For years, man has turned his back on the supernatural.
It's an old concept, one that predates Nazism by at least a few millennia. The Gnostics came up with the best origin story for evil, in my opinion. They believed this calamitously inverted world was created by a hostile, jealous god, known as the Demiurge, who rules it maliciously with the help of interdimensional mind parasites known as archons, who stoke our pain and mental anguish so they can psychically consume it. I know that sounds a little out there, but it can explain a lot if we're willing to take a hard look at how the world really operates. First, as a warm-up exercise, try to imagine the insane Eden that existed during the 2.5 million years of the Cretaceous period, when an estimated 2.5 billion Tyrannosaurus rexes swarmed across North America. Imagine the bloodlust of the savage god that sat in the celestial bleachers watching over such a world. Then imagine that god's minions, the Archons, feasting on the psychic suffering of all the myriad creatures crushed between those billions of toothy T-Rex jaws. Now we have a starting point for what came after, when it was man's turn to play the apex predator. Man's rise to earthly dominance is a never-ending story of ecocide, rape, murder, and theft. Modern civilization has been predicated on killing our own kind and creating exploitive systems of control. Empires have always served an archontic agenda, even, or perhaps especially, the British and American empires. They maximize existential dread and suffering throughout the Demiurge's creation by violating the sovereignty of other nations and people, while taxing their own domestic populace to pay for the wars that will only benefit a parasitical few in black networks, who are willing to harm the many. Those methods of harm vary: slavery and sex trafficking, drug pushing and environmental poisoning, stripping the land of natural resources, introducing inflation-prone fiat currencies, but there's no need to get lost in the details. One example of the madness of our species should suffice. I'm thinking of the global opium trade in the 19th century and how it relates to 21st century surveillance capitalism.
We arrest drug dealers. We criminalize people, mainly black and brown people, for possessing small amounts of drugs like weed. We do this because drugs are bad. Unless, of course, it's your government that's dealing the drugs. Like that time the British Empire got China hooked on opium. Opium had been grown in China since the 11th century, but it was only until the 17th century that usage really took off, when people realized you could smoke it instead of just chewing it. By the 1800s, there were foggy back alley opium dens in the streets of Canton, now known as Guangzhou, Shanghai, and even in London's Limehouse on Pennyfield Street. In the early 19th century, Chinese exports like silk, ceramic, and tea were hugely popular in Britain. Opium was one of the few things that British Empire could trade back. It's estimated that as many as 15 million people were addicted to opium by 1890, making it one of the worst cases of national drug addiction ever seen. They would ship opium grown in colonial India to Canton, where Chinese traders would take it into China. As opium grew in popularity, British trade increased. In 1800, 300 metric tons of opium was shipped into China. 4 decades later, this had increased to 3,500 metric tons of opium. Opium was a highly addictive drug with similar effects to modern-day heroin. Long-term users could experience liver, kidney, and heart problems and could die of withdrawal.
You like? Into the great yawning darkness, be sacrificed. What is a dream? And what is reality? Sometimes a man's life can be a nightmare, other times cannot a nightmare be life. Those voices I heard, were they the voices of men or of some strange imitation of men in some strange writhing jungle of my imagination? Was this opium, or was it reality? Was I dead, or was I only beginning to live?
By the 1830s, people from every level of Chinese society were hooked on opium. After Emperor Daoguang received reports of mass addiction all over the country, he'd had enough.
The government was losing control, and so it decided that it had to act to block the importation of opium. And it did so first in a gentle way, saying,
"The ways of God are without partiality. It is not permissible to hurt one another in order to profit oneself. Is there any article from China that has done any harm to foreign countries? On the other hand, articles that come from outside to China can only be used as toys. We can take them or get by without them. There is, however, a treacherous class of barbarians that manufacture opium, smuggle it for sale, and deceive our foolish people in order to poison their bodies and derive profit therefrom. Not to smoke it yourselves, but yet to dare to prepare and sell it to the foolish masses of the Middle Kingdom. This is to protect one's own life while leading others to death."
When that failed to stop the problem, then
soldiers burned all the opium they found. British traders lost 20,000 chests of opium, equivalent to about £2 million. This led to the First Opium War in 1839. The British were so angry that their drugs had been stolen that they sent troops to the region to demand economic reparations for the financial losses they'd incurred while illegally trafficking narcotics into a foreign country. They were also angry that China refused to open up more ports to British trade and had disrespected their traders. Back in the UK, the press depicted the Chinese as barbarians who had insulted the honor of Brits abroad. In an act of war, Britain occupied Hong Kong, then a sparsely inhabited island off the southeast coast of China. In 1841, China ceded the island to Britain. A year later, the Treaty of Nanking was signed, marking an end to the First Opium War. So Britain got what it wanted: money for illegally trafficking drugs into China and a shiny new island base to smuggle opium from, Hong Kong. Opium remained illegal after the war, but the Chinese authorities were basically forced to accept the drug trade into China. Opium consumption ripped through Chinese society like never before. Chinese smugglers quickly realized that if they registered their ships in Hong Kong as British ships, they could keep smuggling opium into China. This triggered the Second Opium War in 1856, when a Chinese ship flying the Union Jack was seized by the authorities. The Chinese crew was arrested and the British flag was torn down. The British Navy, supported by the French troops, retaliated by seizing Beijing and looting and burning down the Imperial Summer Palace. China was forced to legalize the import of opium. With the opium trade finally legal, imports from British-controlled India nearly tripled to hit 6,500 metric tons in 1880. Fed up with the British running drugs into their country, the Chinese authorities decided that if you couldn't beat them, you might as well join them. By around 1915, moral and political opposition to the drug trade had grown. Britain stopped importing opium to China. It simply wasn't profitable anymore. It's hard to quantify the scale of the misery that Britain caused in China, or the mess they left behind. The British Empire were one of the biggest drug pushers in history, but hardly anyone in the UK knows what we did in China. Pablo Escobar, he's got nothing on the British Empire.
So in the game of capitalism, this is how it works. The most horrific, most sociopathic company will win the day. Always. Now, if you have regulation, if you're in one of these countries with a little more regulation, it can slow it down, but you can't stop the gravity of the capitalist system. The needle always, the compass always points towards sociopath, all right? Whether it's the corporate entity or the board at the top of that corporate entity, that needle, it fucking always points towards sociopath. It is the guiding star.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Will and Chase. I've been around for a long, long year. So many a man's soul and faith. I was around when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain. Made damn sure that Pilate washed his hands, sealed his fate. Pleased to meet you. Hope you guess my name. Oh yeah. But what's puzzling you is just the nature of my game.
There's a certain class of implacable, intergenerational predators that has always been with us. They won't leave us alone because they're arrogant enough to believe they're superior to the rest of humanity, for whatever lame reasons. Maybe because they were born into families with incredible wealth and/or political power. Maybe because they went to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Oxford, or the London School of Economics.
Hope you guess my name.
You'll never submit to a breed of parasites.
But what's confusing you is just the nature of my game.
Or maybe, as is so often the case today, they insist on meddling in other people's lives because they were greedy and amoral enough to acquire large fortunes by nefarious means, and they think that somehow proves they have the mandate of heaven. Usually, it only proves they have the mandate of a global criminal shadow government that appointed them as frontmen. Dead, empty mass that will say and do whatever they're told.
deep state, police state, intel state, shadow government, government within a government, globalists. They pick somebody and say, come here, you. They infiltrate everybody. Do you think that Bill Gates got to be Bill Gates because of his genius, because of his novel idea? You don't think the government, DARPA, Big Brother, whoever you want, whatever you want to call this, they pick these people? And Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, the biggest poser of them all, but he's got to be somebody. You got to pick somebody. They picked Zuckerberg. He was the kid from the Harvard dorm who put together this social media thing called Facebook. We're going to pick you, DARPA. Hi, this is Zuckerberg. You're going to enjoy your billions. We run it. We're going to go into people's homes. We're going to use you as a vehicle. We don't care about the money. We own the world. We own money. We'll give you $1 trillion. Doesn't mean anything to us. We don't care about that. So somebody along the line must have said, I'm just guessing, listen, Bezos, you're going to do what we want. Absolutely. Jeff, you want to have microchips in your butt? Absolutely. Do I get to keep your money? Yeah. Oh, sure. I'll do it. Vaccines, sound waves, you name it. I'm Jeff Bezos. Do you think that guy made Amazon the way it is? Seriously, does anybody think that?
They want the world to think they're inspired geniuses, but they're just fucking possessed. Tools of for-profit totalitarianism. Woodrow Wilson was one of those tools. He did more to set us on the path toward tyranny than perhaps any other American president. He was the president of Princeton University before he became president of the U.S. in 1913. That same year, on December 23rd, he signed the Federal Reserve Act into law, which put the fate of U.S. currency into the hands of a private banking cartel of Wall Street insiders who own and control the Federal Reserve System, thus enabling them to orchestrate the huge wealth transfer heist from America's middle class that we've been seeing ever since. The Federal Reserve's ostensible purpose was to prevent future economic depressions, but the Fed bankers would soon prove how ill-suited they were for that task, with the Depression of 1920 and the Wall Street crash of 1929. Wilson also signed the Revenue Act of 1913 into law, which imposed a federal income tax on Americans shortly after the ratification of the 16th Amendment.
Bankers knew that this tax would ultimately end up in their pockets. As Mayor Rothschild said, "Give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws." He knew that he and the other bankers would now control the laws of the nation. Government gave these bankers one of its most important powers, and now had to borrow money from them and pay interest to finance the government. So the American people were forced to lower their standard of living and pay a graduated income tax to the government, just so the government could give these bankers more profits.
By 1918, the government's income tax revenue had surpassed $1 billion. By 1920, with Wilson still in office, it topped $5 billion. Now it's in the trillions. As P.J. O'Rourke has written, "Giving money and power to government is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys. Every government is a parliament of whores. The trouble is, in a democracy, the whores are us." What did Wilson do with all those tax dollars, you might be wondering? Well, for starters, that self-righteous twat went on a splurge to impose his racist, hypocritical ideas about the new freedom on the rest of the world. Like some rabid imperialist descended from Genghis Khan, he sent American troops to topple governments in Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Honduras, Panama, Mexico, and Russia. As the historian Stephen Kinzer describes it, no other president invaded as many countries as this sworn promoter of self-determination. Like his predecessors and successors, Wilson insisted he was doing it for the good of the target countries. Americans would leave them alone, he promised, as soon as they learned to elect good men. That meant, of course, men who would place the interests of the United States above the interests of their own countries. Wilson made so many bad decisions in such short order that you have to wonder if he was being blackmailed by bankers or possessed by archons. He ran for re-election in 1916, campaigning on the dubious slogan, "He kept us out of war." But right after winning a second term, he made the dick move of asking Congress to declare war against Germany. He also asked for, and managed to get, a military draft to expand the army, which would eventually conscript nearly 3 million men and kill or maim at least one out of every 10 of them. He hit Americans with some stiff tax increases to pay for that military-industrial expansion, while providing huge loans to Allied governments. The federal budget spiked from around $1 billion a year in 1916 to over $19 billion in 1919. The war profiteers and their black network associates must have been extremely pleased.
Planet of the vampires!
Some historians have suggested that Wilson was being blackmailed over his affair with Mary Peck, a saucy, soon-to-be divorced woman who met Wilson on a vacation to Bermuda in 1907, while his first wife, a depressive named Ellen, was back at home nursing their sick daughter and preparing to die herself from kidney disease. If those blackmail allegations are true, Wilson certainly wouldn't be the only blackmailable president we've ever elected.
I'm a horny president.
Although who needs blackmail now, when the gears of government are greased by a system of legalized bribery that results in a pay-to-play kakistocracy? You might think that handing over the country to a bunch of bankers, taxing the shit out of its citizens, blowing a huge hole in the federal budget, and getting the military mired in conflicts all over the world would be enough. But Wilson's priggish fuckery was far from over. In 1917, he established the first modern propaganda office, the Committee on Public Information,
under a journalist named George Creel.
It was intended to manipulate the minds of Americans into being more gung-ho for war and their own enslavement.
Creel tackles the war effort as a plain publicity proposition, the world's greatest adventure in advertising. It will be an all-star production, offstage and on.
Noam Chomsky calls that manufacturing consent. Plutocrat-controlled mainstream media outlets appear to be doing that job now, with the help of Silicon Valley algorithm manipulation on the big social media platforms and search engines. It's also worth noting that Wilson signed the Espionage Act of 1917 into law, which has since been perverted to prosecute war crimes whistleblowers like Daniel Ellsberg, Chelsea Manning, and Julian Assange.
We have free media, we have freedom of speech. But if you raise this question, can I ask you also one? How do you assess what happened to Mr. Assange? Is it a reflection of free media in your country?
We're not here to discuss
no,
my
let's
country.
Discuss.
No,
let's discuss.
No, President
In order
Aliyev.
to accuse me, saying that Armenians will not have free media here, let's talk about Assange. How many years he spent in Ecuadorian embassy? You did it, not us, and now he's in prison. So you have no moral right to talk about free media when you do these things.
In the aftermath of World War I, the so-called Red Scare was used by Wilson's administration to smear and blacklist anti-war activists and other perceived enemies of the state by labeling them as Bolsheviks, in much the same way that McCarthyism's commies and pinkos and Russiagate's Putin puppets would be used later.
Don't be wowed by his toxic shirtless masculinity or his judo skills. He is a silent killer and a former KGB officer who has raped his own country for profit and silenced those who oppose him.
Look, Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president.
The oligarchs of the era cynically started making use of the Red Scare to arrest union leaders and erode the gains that labor movements had made during the war. But Wilson couldn't be bothered to stop that betrayal of America's working men and women. He'd made it to Princeton, after all. The undereducated could go to hell. Finally, in the last grand parallel to a global criminal shadow government conspiracy that's right in our faces today, the Spanish flu pandemic swept across the globe during Wilson's final years in office, killing millions, including my paternal grandmother's brother Gordon, who died from the flu during his sophomore year at Stanford. But again, Wilson couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. By then, he was spending most of his time screwing around in Europe, where he was a prominent promoter and architect of a one-world government plan known as the League of Nations. Its ostensible purpose was to prevent future wars, but the League of Nations member countries would soon prove how ill-suited they were for that task when World War II came along. No one knew that at the time, though, so Wilson was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts in 1919. History rarely repeats itself, but it often rhymes. And Woodrow Wilson wouldn't be the last U.S. president to be awarded a Nobel Prize for doing more to start wars than to end them.
We tortured some folks.
If you know the history of the man behind the prize, Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite and an obscenely rich owner of a late 19th century cannon factory, then those awards only seem fitting in this inverted world, where the devil looks after his own.
My fiery cheeked little death merchant.
Death to the fascist insect that preys upon the lives of the people. Death to the fascist insect that preys upon the lives of the people.
For those who study satanic inversions, it soon becomes apparent that most of the world's wealthiest families have emerged from a matrix of ruthless psychopathy, military-industrial media intelligence skullduggery, and black network banking.
What they're looking to do is move to traditional government functions being run by corporations and using technocracy to be able to extract all the benefits of new technology and all the benefits of any production by the general population. What they're saying is we want 100% of the economic value and we want 100% control. And we're going to use new technology to basically extract that. And this is how bankers can run the whole shebang and extract, taxation without representation. That's what they're up to.
It's important for people to understand that the shift to electronic government will just be really automated and then potentially integrated with smart city sensor networks, right? Which are embedded within global policing systems and surveillance systems.
Well, they're talking about total control. So I don't know if you saw this presentation. I keep describing it. The IMF had a panel with Carstens and Powell. So Carstens is the general manager of the BIS, and Powell is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. And Carstens mentions, the beauty of CBDC is if you don't want a foreign citizen transacting in your CBDC, you can just turn them off. Yeah. And of course, what that meant is you can turn all your citizens off one by one if you want to. Yeah. So Powell is like backing up and saying, don't mention that.
Right. But it's all running on the telecoms. It's the SIM cards in your cell phone. And they've got sniffer drones. They'll just, are you somewhere you're not supposed to be? Whoop.
We're coming into an inflection point where their goal is to reduce hundreds of millions of people to poverty. Yeah. And they need a way to engineer that, and they need a way to manage it. And that's what they're trying to do is come up with a model, because remember, they're using our taxes and our retirement savings to engineer it.
We're paying to build this prison.
Right,
Yeah.
because most of the money that's being spent to build this has been accessed illegally through governments. So their management of the government resources has been criminal, and there are massive violations of the law.
Time and again, my research has confirmed Honoré de Balzac's observation, as interpreted by Mario Puzo in an epigraph for The Godfather, that behind every great fortune, there's a crime. And yet these same families almost invariably end up sponsoring eugenics programs, as if they believe a legacy of ill-gotten riches makes them uniquely qualified to decide who among us should survive and who should die. The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Bush family, and the Bronfmans, they all fit into this template, where capitalism shades into organized crime.
We can do anything we want.
William Devil Bill Rockefeller was a notorious horse thief, bigamist, serial rapist, and purveyor of quack cancer remedies. Devil Bill begat John D. Rockefeller, who would grow up to become the Rothschild finance monopolist of Standard Oil. By 1890, he would control roughly 90% of all the refined oil flows in the U.S., thereby making him the richest businessman who ever lived. In 1901, John D. Rockefeller's only son, John Jr., married Senator Nelson Aldrich's daughter, Abby.
As a key figure on the influential Senate Finance Committee, Aldrich oversaw the nation's currency. It was in this capacity that he presided over a secretive Jekyll Island conclave with the nation's richest and most powerful banking interests in 1910. As outlined in Century of Enslavement, The History of the Federal Reserve, it was that meeting, undertaken in complete secrecy and hidden from the public until decades after it took place, that eventually gave birth to the Federal Reserve System itself. Indeed, it is in the marriage of John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s wealth and business influence with Abby Aldrich's banking and political influence that we can best understand the world-conquering dominance of the brothers' generation of the Rockefeller clan.
Abby and John Rockefeller Jr. raised 6 children together, among them UFO-chasing Lawrence, politically minded Nelson, a 4-term governor of New York and the nation's vice president during the brief reign of Gerald Ford, and that sly, ultimate insider, David, who would become the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations and the CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank, the largest credit card issuer, or financial bloodsucker, in American history. In the meantime, the Rockefellers were conspiring with the Carnegies to replace natural plant-based medicines and holistic practices with petrochemical-based big pharma products that could be patented and sold for huge profits. The Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Institution would also become major funders of the Eugenics Record Office at Cold Spring Harbor on Long Island, and the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany, where Ernst Rudin and other Nazi eugenicists got their start in the 1920s.
I just want to get out of here and see everyone again.
Alle Nationen haben sich mit einer außergewöhnlich großen Menge an minderwertigen, schwachen, kranken und Verkrüppelten abzugeben. Nur durch kluge Gesetze über Sterilisation würden wir auch in der Lage sein, den vernünftigsten Weg der Zeugung herbeizuführen.
The Rockefellers even funded the program that Josef Mengele worked in before he slithered off to Auschwitz. They'd go on to fund the CIA's assorted mind control projects and Operation Gladio as well.
And I think that you've been taking this whole thing a lot more seriously than the police and the FBI and other federal people have been taking it.
Around the same time that John D. Rockefeller seized U.S. media, he also hijacked U.S. medicine. When it was discovered that drugs could be produced from petroleum, America's top oil mogul ordered his army of propagandists to invert reality accordingly. Medicines used for thousands of years were suddenly classified as alternative, while the new, petroleum-based, highly addictive, and patentable drugs were declared the gold standard. After buying the German pharmaceutical company that manufactured chemicals of war for Adolf Hitler, Rockefeller leveraged his political influence by pressing Congress to declare natural healing modalities unscientific quackery. Rockefeller then took control of the American Medical Association and began offering massive grants to top medical schools, under the mandate that only his approved curriculum be taught. Any mention of the healing powers of herbs, plants, and diet was erased from most medical textbooks. Doctors and professors who objected to Rockefeller's plan were crucified by the media, removed from the AMA, and stripped of their license to teach and practice medicine. Those who dared to speak out were arrested and jailed. When evidence began to emerge that petroleum-based medicines were causing cancer, Mr. Rockefeller founded the American Cancer Society, through which he suppressed that information. Currently, every year, the pharmaceutical industry spends at least twice the amount as big oil to influence laws, policies, and public perception. Thanks to Mr. Rockefeller, the architect of American monopolies, no industry has more power over our lives than Big Pharma.
The people in the house were all brought into the living room and tied up, and I remember that Wojtek Bakowski, I believe is his name, I tied his hands with a towel and then was instructed to kill him.
Mankind must put an end to war, or war will put an end to mankind.
Prescott Bush was the Nazi-friendly founder and director of the Union Banking Corporation, which was seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act during World War II.
And when the U.S. grabbed the bank, he protested. He said, "Wait a minute, that's my bank." Hoover said, "That's right, no mistake, you're a Nazi, you run a Nazi bank." Now, let's not exaggerate. You run a bank for the Nazis, they tell you what to do, you do it. Does that make you a Nazi? Just because you follow their orders? Well, yes, it kind of does, doesn't it? And besides, Prescott didn't live in Germany, he lived in America. He had a choice. The principal German business partner in the Union Bank was the most infamous Nazi financier, Fritz Thyssen, an early enthusiastic and vitally important supporter of Hitler's. So Hoover knew what he was talking about. Prescott Bush was a Nazi's Nazi.
Prescott begat George H.W. Bush, or Magog, to his pals in Skull and Bones, who would grow up to become the CIA finance president of the Zapata offshore company.
In a world where personal connection is everything, no one could possibly have a closer personal relationship to the head of hiring for CIA than George Herbert Walker Bush. Bush's first job on leaving Skull and Bones was to work for Neil Mallon, brother under the skin to Prescott, class of 1918. In a letter to White House aide C.D. Jackson, dated March 26th of 1953, now Senator Prescott Bush described Neil Mallon as a very old and dear friend. I might say that Neil Mallon is well known to Allen Dulles and has tried to be helpful to him in the CIA, especially in the procurement of individuals to serve in that important agency. So, you couldn't ask for more powerful evidence that our George Bush was in the CIA when Hoover said that he was. But you can get it. This letter records a meeting between Prescott Bush, George's CIA promoting father, Neil Mallon, the CIA recruiter, and Allen Dulles, the director of CIA, to discuss, quote, our pilot project in the Caribbean, unquote. Now, here you have the two most important men in George's future professional life, his father, Prescott, and the man who trained George in the oil business, Neil Mallon, meeting with the head of the CIA in order to coordinate with the CIA their future plans in the Caribbean. Prescott and Neil Mallon's plans had George at their center. The terrorist raids of Operation 40 involving Hunt, Sturgis, and Marita Lorenz were the CIA's private project in the Caribbean. And a short time after this meeting, at the moment that Allen Dulles began implementing his plan for the CIA invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, Bush began his independent business career as the sole owner of Zapata Offshore Oil. Zapata Offshore's oil rigs just happened to be positioned right in the middle of CIA operations in the area 30 miles north of Cuba near Cay Sal, an island used by the CIA for supplying the various terrorist raids of Operation 40, Operation Mongoose, Alpha 66, and the rest of these murderers against Cuba. This letter, then, not only ties George to the CIA, corroborating the Hoover memo on that point, It not only ties George's future oil company to the CIA's plans in the Caribbean, but it thereby ties George to the CIA's misguided anti-Castro groups mentioned in the Hoover memo, which says, in black and white, that there is a direct, first-degree connection between Prescott's son, George Bush, and the misguided anti-Castro Cubans, who were famously supervised directly by E. Howard Hunt. The memo doesn't say that members of some misguided anti-Castro group killed Kennedy, but Hoover undoubtedly knew that they had. What the memo does do is name Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency as a CIA officer associated with the CIA's misguided anti-Castro groups. It suggests that Bush was the person at CIA responsible for these people. And it says that the CIA sent Mr. George Bush to Washington the day after the assassination to answer for them, when the FBI had questions about the activities of some misguided anti-Castro group. The memo was a scandal when it was made public in 1988, because it says that George Bush was in the CIA in 1963. It means that Bush lied, committed perjury when he told the Senate under oath that he had no CIA experience before becoming director in 1974.
In the early 1960s, Magog would play clandestine roles in both the Bay of Pigs invasion, or Operation Zapata, and the assassination of JFK, thereby making him the first CIA agent to become a U.S. president.
We have before us the opportunity to forge a new world order. A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
We are living through the transformation of a formerly democratic republic into something else. We're looking at growing authoritarianism. That's not an overstatement. Why is the administration still hiding more than 10,000 hours of surveillance tape from the U.S. Capitol on January 6th? What could possibly be the reason for that? Even as they call for more openness, we need to get to the bottom of it. They could release those tapes today, but they're not. Why? We know that the government is hiding the identity of many law enforcement officers who were present at the Capitol on January 6th, not just the one who killed Ashley Babbitt. According to the government's own court filings, those law enforcement officers participated in the riot, sometimes in violent ways. We know that because, without fail, the government has thrown the book at most people who are present in the Capitol on January 6th. There was a nationwide dragnet to find them, and many of them are still in solitary confinement tonight. But strangely, some of the key people who participated on January 6th have not been charged. Look at the document. The government calls those people unindicted co-conspirators. What does that mean? Well, it means that in potentially every single case, they were FBI operatives. In all, Revolver News reported that there are, quote, upwards of 20 unindicted co-conspirators in the Oath Keeper indictments, all playing various roles in the conspiracy, who have not been charged for virtually the exact same activities, and in some cases, much, much more severe activities, as those named alongside them in the indictments. So it turns out that this white supremacist insurrection was, again, by the government's own admission in these documents, organized at least in part by government agents. So if you're wondering why they're always comparing January 6th to 9/11, there's your answer. They're using the same tactics. If you empower the government to violate civil liberties, it's just a matter of time before ambitious politicians use those same mechanisms to suppress political dissent. And that's what we're seeing now. In 2012, a writer for The Nation called Petra Bartosiewicz found that FBI agents had, quote, crossed the line from merely observing potential criminal behavior, which, by the way, is allowed and good, to, and we're quoting, encouraging people and assisting people to participate in plots that are largely scripted by the FBI itself, end quote. And we checked, we looked carefully, and that's not an exaggeration. Darren Beattie heads up Revolver News. It sounds like, according to this, I have to say, remarkable piece that you've just put up late last night, read it in bed at midnight, that the FBI was organizing the riots of January 6th.
Well, yes, it certainly suggests that possibility, and I'm hearing from people that this is the most important and the darkest investigative piece they've seen in years. But the American people deserve the truth about 1/6, not just for the sake of Ashley Babbitt, not just for the sake of the hundreds of people held in prison unjustly as a violation of human rights, but for the sake of the 70+ million people who are Trump supporters or just against the corrupt ruling class who have effectively been labeled de facto domestic extremists by our own government. After seeing all this, you have to ask yourself, does the national security apparatus do anything but conspire against the American people? I'm led to conclude that we cannot have a democracy. Everything in our politics will be fake and performative until we bring the national security state, including the FBI, to heel. It's not a left issue, it's not a right issue. Every politician who cares about our country should demand a Church Committee 2.0.
Immediately. And people of good faith on the left should join it.
After a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy,
Magog and his imposing wife Barbara raised 6 children together, among them shady, money-grubbing Neil, a major player in the savings and loan swindles of the 1980s, woefully uncharismatic Jeb, a 2-term governor of Florida who ran a feckless presidential campaign against Donald Trump in 2016.
This is a tough business.
You're a tough guy.
And we need to have a leader that is prepared. You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way.
Let's see, I'm at 42 and you're at 3, so
doesn't matter.
And clueless George W., who would become the 43rd president of the United States for 2 terms, presiding over both the 9/11 attacks and the 2008 financial coup d'etat. In the meantime, Prescott Bush paid for Nazi master race strategists to attend the 1932 International Congress of Eugenics in New York, and he was the treasurer of Planned Parenthood in the 40s. His son Magog would later earn another nickname from his congressional colleagues, who started calling him Rubbers because he was such an ardent advocate for restricting third world population growth. I could get into the strange facts about how the Bush family helped bring down what the Rockefellers had built up.
We saw the possibilities of a new order.
And how both families seemed perfectly happy with the outcome of protracted wars in the Middle East. But that really belongs in a different documentary.
You're kidding.
Now we have Bill Gates and that international man of mystery, Klaus Schwab, leading the charge into eugenics-influenced population control policies and the 4th Industrial Revolution, which can be easily mistaken for the Fourth Reich. Eugen Schwab was the managing director of the German branch of the Swiss engineering firm Escher Weiss, a prominent military contractor that used slave labor to produce essential machinery for the Nazi war effort, including a special turbine used in a Norsk Hydro industrial facility in Norway, where the Nazis were producing heavy water for their secret atomic bomb program. If that program had been successful, World War II might have gone sideways on the Allies.
Wir sehen uns in Valhalla.
Eugen begat Klaus Schwab, who would grow up to become an ass-kissing Henry Kissinger protege and an assistant to the chairman at his father's firm, where young Klaus spearheaded a push into new medical technology products while maintaining the old business of building and then selling nuclear weapons components to genocidal maniacs. According to Johnny Vedmore's Schwab Family Values article published at Whitney Webb's Unlimited Hangout website,
the company, while Schwab was on the board, began playing a critical key role in the development of South Africa's illegal nuclear weapons program during the darkest years of the apartheid regime.
Vedmore went on to write,
in the case of Klaus Schwab himself, it appears that he has helped to launder relics of the Nazi era, i.e. its nuclear ambitions and its population control ambitions. While serving in a leadership capacity at Sulzer Escher Weiss, Schwab sought to aid the nuclear ambitions of the South African regime, then the most Nazi-adjacent government in the world, preserving Escher Weiss's own Nazi-era legacy. Then, through the World Economic Forum, Schwab helped to rehabilitate eugenics-influenced population control policies during the post-World War II era, a time when the revelations of Nazi atrocities quickly brought the pseudoscience into great disrepute. Is there any reason to believe that Klaus Schwab, as he exists today, has changed in any way? Or is he still the public face of a decades-long effort to ensure the survival of a very old agenda?
We can change our behavior to be in harmony with nature again.
Combined with a spirit of bold curiosity for the adventure ahead.
By 1971, Schwab had rebranded himself as the founder and executive chairman of the Davos-based European Management Symposium, which would later change its name to the World Economic Forum, thereby making Klaus the Bond villain-like face of the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Klaus married a woman named Hilda that same year, and they raised 2 children together, but it's still too early to tell if either one of them will carry on the family's evil empire-enabling traditions. Going by the Rockefeller and Bush examples, it would seem you need to raise 6 children to guarantee that evil will skip a generation. Which brings us to Bill Gates, that Kermit the Frog-voiced carnival barker who's trying to sell us on everything that's screwed up in the world today. Experimental mRNA vaccines, glyphosate, GMOs, shitty software products, recycled turd water, bug protein hamburgers, and sun-dimming technology that will make the Earth's atmosphere more conducive to 5G. Never mind the smart dust you'll be breathing in.
They want us to eat bugs and drink shit.
There's a reason why Bill Gates is now synonymous in the minds of many with Anthony, Little Lord Fauci, and Jeffrey, get 'em while they're young, Epstein. And it's not because a bunch of billionaire oligarchs and provably corrupt politicians suddenly started caring about our collective health and welfare for the first time in history.
We have to convince people and put them in a car and drive them and get that vaccine in their arm.
Fuck no.
It seems more likely that those billionaire oligarchs and corrupt politicians are bent on turning us into propaganda-bedazzled spectators at our own annihilation.
Bless you.
Sorry, he's got a touch of flu.
Yeah, it's going round.
Here we go. Yeah, just have a little lie down. You going somewhere nice?
Just getting away for a bit. Somewhere no one can find me.
God, that sounds great. We're off on holiday to the south of France.
Oh, nice. It's a long way by coach.
I know. It's just, you know, the environment.
Yes, we should all think of that.
I don't want to sound like a twat, but I just, you know, I do think that we've all got a responsibility. I just do.
No, you're right, we do. We all do. Why did you have him then?
Sorry?
Nothing uses carbon like a first world human, yet you created one. Why? Why would you do that? He will produce 515 tons of carbon in his lifetime. That's 40 trucks worth. Having him was the equivalent of nearly 6,500 flights to Paris. You could have flown 90 times a year, there and back nearly every week of your life, and still not have the same impact on the planet as his birth had.
Yeah, but I don't think...
Not to mention the pesticides, detergents, the huge quantity of plastics, the nuclear fuels used to keep him warm. His birth was a selfish act. It was brutal. You have condemned others to suffering. In fact, if you really cared, what you'd do is cut his throat open right now.
Excuse me?
Or I could do it for you. I could take out the knife, make an incision in his neck, walk away. I'd get my coach over there, and you would have done more than your bit for the future of humanity. I could do it now. But look at me chatting. I think they're about to leave. I hope he gets over that flu. But maybe he just shouldn't.
1917 lecture titled The Fallen Spirit's Influence in the World, Rudolf Steiner said, "I have told you that the spirits of darkness are going to inspire their human hosts, in whom they will be dwelling, to find a vaccine that will drive all inclination towards spirituality out of people's souls when they are still very young." From the very start of the COVID-19 scamdemic, I've wondered about what might be dwelling in the mind and epicene body of Bill Gates. That line of thinking eventually led me to Frederick Taylor Gates. The two men aren't related, so far as I can tell. But if you look at the huge amount of influence that those two particular Gates families have had on our world, especially as that influence relates to vaccines, it's not too much of a stretch to think that they might have shared the same indwelling spirit. Frederick Taylor Gates was an American Baptist minister who met John D. Rockefeller in 1889, right around the time that Rockefeller had a lock on 90% of U.S. oil flows. Gates was trying to raise money for a Baptist school of higher education that would eventually become the University of Chicago. He was only 35 at the time and had no business experience whatsoever, but Gates must have been devilishly persuasive, because Rockefeller ended up donating $600,000 to the project, the equivalent of about $18 million today. He also asked Gates to move to New York to help him manage the Standard Oil fortune. Gates soon became Rockefeller's chief philanthropic and business advisor. Like some satanically inspired savant, between 1893 and 1901, Gates used Rockefeller's millions to amass a fleet of transportation vessels, mines, docks, and railroads, which he then turned around and sold to U.S. Steel and J.P. Morgan for a profit of over $1 billion in today's dollars. By 1902, he'd also designed and established the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now Rockefeller University, and the General Education Board. Both of those institutions, under Gates' guidance, would use the 1910 Carnegie Foundation-funded Flexner Report as a bludgeon to reform medical practices and restructure medical schools across the U.S. and Canada, even though John D. Rockefeller himself was a believer in traditional folk remedies that had been developed and refined over the centuries.
Almost overnight, all of the major universities received large grants from these sources and also accepted 1, 2, or 3 of these people that I mentioned on their board of directors, and the schools literally were taken over by the financial interests that put up the money. Now, what happened as a result of that is that the schools did receive an infusion of money. They were able to build new buildings. They were able to add expensive equipment to their laboratories. They were able to hire top-notch teachers. But at the same time as doing that, they skewed the whole thing in the direction of pharmaceutical drugs. That was the efficiency in philanthropy. The doctors from that point forward in history would be taught pharmaceutical drugs. All of the great teaching institutions in America were captured by the pharmaceutical interests in this fashion. And it's amazing how little money it really took to do it.
So, in a way, you could say that Frederick Taylor Gates was the granddaddy of modern allopathic medicine in America, or at least one of its founding fathers, even though he had no formal medical training, like another Gates we know. As I look deeper into the life of Frederick Taylor Gates, a small-time minister out of Minnesota that Rockefeller would come to regard as the greatest businessman he'd ever met, the parallels to Bill Gates kept getting weirder. For example, Frederick Gates was the inspiration and prime mover behind setting up the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913, the first charitable foundation that was truly international in its scale and scope, serving as a template for later globe-spanning charitable behemoths like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And his son, Frederick Lamont Gates, let's call him Fred Jr., was a Yale grad who went through the MD program at Johns Hopkins before joining his father at the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1913, where he became deeply interested in vaccines.
She's alive!
During World War I, Fred Jr., a U.S. Army Medical Corps volunteer, got assigned to the base hospital at Fort Riley, Kansas, where many historians believe the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic originated.
Debbie, we've kept close watch of these past months, and we're sure that you're no Nazi or Vichy sympathizer.
Oh, I hate them all!
While he was at Fort Riley, Fred Jr. administered an experimental Rockefeller Institute vaccine for meningitis to nearly 5,000 soldiers between January 21st and June 4th of 1918. That vaccine had been cultivated in horses, similar to how the first smallpox vaccines were cultivated in cows. Some researchers have speculated that the first cases of Spanish flu at Fort Riley were caused by a burning mountain of horse manure that got out of control, swamping the soldiers in a thick, virus-laden smog of equine shit smoke. Could that be a cover story? Could a botched vaccine, cultured from horses, somehow have started the ball rolling on the deaths of 50 to 100 million people from the misnamed Spanish flu just over 100 years ago? I honestly don't know. I'll leave that to the not always honest medical experts. But as coincidences go, it's certainly an odd one.
As infected soldiers from across the country made their way to the trenches in France, the virus spread. But the nation wasn't told. A year earlier, President Woodrow Wilson had rammed through Congress the Sedition Act, making it a crime to say or publish anything negative that would affect the war effort.
Wilson created what was called the Committee for Public Information. The architect of that committee said, "Truth and falsehood are arbitrary terms. The force of an idea lies in its inspirational value. It matters very little if it is true or false."
Was that a license to lie to the American public?
It was precisely that.
What I do know is that Frederick Taylor Gates ended up with a pretty lush lifestyle for a Baptist preacher. A lifestyle that in fact might seem more suited to a budding Antichrist. He raised his family in the Gates Mansion at 66 South Mountain Avenue in Montclair, New Jersey, a temple-like palace designed by George Washington Mayer, a former colleague of Frank Lloyd Wright, with an interior furnished by Tiffany & Company, where the property taxes alone now run to about $100,000 a year. It's a mansion I often pass on my weekend visits to see my ex-wife in that same town, which also happens to be the home of one of the biggest corporate sellouts in recent times, Stephen Colbert, who lives just a few blocks north.
Oh, I hate them all!
Jon Stewart went on Stephen Colbert's show, and he exposed Stephen Colbert for the shit libbery that he's been pushing since he became a CBS host. And now Stephen Colbert was my hero, and I've said it many times, he did the best political satire show of all time. And that character he invented was amazing. It was just amazing. And it was his whole thing. And that since he went over to CBS, it's a totally different guy. He turned into a regular shit liberal. He says things like, "I think America's a force for good in the world." He says things like that. Remember when he said that? Yes. So Jon Stewart went on, and they wanted to talk about the origins of the Wuhan theory. Now, what's happened because of Trump is the establishment has shut down any kind of debate. You're not allowed to question anything. And if you have a different point of view, you are then ostracized, stigmatized with the scarlet letter, Trumper, bad person, Trumper. But as a comedian, you're always supposed to be trying to be a contrarian. You're supposed to always try to throw rocks at the establishment. You're always supposed to be doing that. Jon Stewart didn't forget that. Jon Stewart remembers that. And watch this. Just watch. This is fascinating.
I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to science. Science has, in many ways, helped ease the suffering of this pandemic, which was more than likely caused by science.
Now, Stephen Colbert, I don't know if you can see the look on his face, but he's saying, am I allowed to laugh at this? Is this okay, or will this get me in trouble? Which is the last thing a comedian should be thinking. But it's the first thing he's thinking, because he's an establishment tool now, 100%. 100%. So he doesn't, his audience laughed at Jon Stewart. He didn't. He's worried. That's what that look on his face says. A comedian's joking around about an open investigation. This might get me in hot water. Okay, watch this. It gets much, much worse.
But what do you mean by that? Do you mean like perhaps there's a chance that this was created in a lab? There's an investigation.
A chance?
Well, if there was evidence, I'd love to hear it.
There's a novel.
So Stephen Colbert now acting like a moron. Well, if there's evidence, I don't know. I'd love to hear it. You haven't heard the evidence, Stephen? You didn't hear the former head of the CDC say that it was no chance it wasn't created? You didn't hear that guy say that it had to be created? You didn't hear that guy say that? The former head of the CDC. Like, I'm all for being open-minded. You're not. He's sitting there shitting his pants right now because a guy who's actually more famous than him is now saying something that's not allowed. And he's saying it in a comedic way that's getting huge laughs. And by the way, makes sense. And so watch Jon Stewart dismantle him.
There's a novel respiratory coronavirus overtaking Wuhan, China. What do we do? Oh, you know who we could ask? The Wuhan novel respiratory coronavirus lab. The disease is the same name as the lab. That's just a little too weird, don't you think? And then they ask the scientists, they're like, how did this, so wait a minute, you work at the Wuhan respiratory coronavirus lab. How did this happen? And they're like, a pangolin kissed a turtle. I work at the coronavirus lab in Wuhan. Oh, because there's a coronavirus loose in Wuhan. How did that happen? Maybe a bat flew into the cloaca of a turkey and then it sneezed into my chili and now we all have coronavirus. Like, come on.
Okay, wait a second.
What about this? What about this? Listen to this.
Wait a second.
No, stop. Why are you trying to stop the bit, Stephen? Stop! Stop being hilarious! Please stop being unbelievably entertaining, hilarious, while making salient points. We have to stop this. That's who Stephen Colbert has become.
All right, John. Oh my God! Oh my God! There's been an outbreak of chocolatey goodness near Hershey, Pennsylvania. What do you think happened? Like, oh, I don't know. Maybe a steam shovel mated with a cocoa bean. Or it's the chocolate factory. Maybe that's it.
There's one more odd little coincidence that might be worth noting. In 1953, the Gates Mansion was bought by another crazy rich preacher. This one was known as Sweet Daddy Grace, the founder and first bishop of a cult-like faith-healing operation called the United House of Prayer for All People. I've often thought those cold-blooded clergymen who make a show of wallowing in the wealth they've skimmed off their flocks are the very worst sort of hypocrites. If anyone carries the whiff of brimstone around with them wherever they go, it must be them. The devil, after all, would be sure to have tax-exempt status and an enormous charitable foundation to influence the world in any way the spirits of darkness see fit.
Just like the Bible says, it's basically an intergalactic invasion into this space through people. I'm telling you, it's what all the ancients said, it's what they warned of, it's what we're dealing with. They're demons. They're frickin' interdimensional invaders, okay? I'll just say it, make fun of me all you want on CNN or wherever, but everyone already innately knows this. These people are not frickin' humans, okay?
As Thomas Pynchon observed in Gravity's Rainbow, some people seem to occupy the role of gates, or sorting demons such as James Clerk Maxwell once proposed, helping to concentrate energy into one favored room of the creation at the expense of everything else. Maxwell's demon was a thought experiment to illustrate how the second law of thermodynamics could be violated, but it also might be loosely applied to the distribution of wealth. As we know from the annual statistics compiled by Oxfam International, the military-industrial media intelligence complex, that Maxwell's demon of global capitalism has been redistributing wealth from the public purse into the deep pockets of the rich and powerful on a scale never before seen. As a reminder, the 10 richest pandemic profiteers, which would include Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates, saw their wealth increase by $540 billion between March 18th and December 31st of 2020, while millions of ordinary people across the world lost their livelihoods and their basic human rights to free travel, free assembly, free speech, and even free breathing, all due to the lockdowns.
It is still not safe.
Those lockdowns have been so costly and such manifest failures at achieving their stated goals that it seems their true goal always must have been something else. Were the lockdowns intended to act as gates, sending more business to the world's billionaires while closing off economic opportunities and lopsidedly increasing entropy for all those who toil for too little on a planet where there should be enough for everyone? I have a hard time believing those 10 billionaires obtained their $540 billion windfall with just talent, pluck, and sheer dumb luck.
Don't you lie to me.
Bill Gates' father, Bill Sr., was purportedly the son of a high school dropout who sold furniture in Bremerton. Yet Bill Sr. somehow managed to join the ranks of Washington State's most elite families. He was a hulking 6'7" attorney
who co-founded Preston Gates and Ellis, a law firm that had offices across the United States and China. As a man highly involved in politics, William Gates holds quite the laundry list of accolades. As he sat on the board of eugenicist Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood before the era of Roe v. Wade. Not only that, but he was also the face of a state income tax initiative in Washington state. And Mama Gates, who also is known as Mary Maxwell, started off as a humble school teacher and eventually became chairwoman of United Way. She came from a long line of money and power, as her father was a wealthy banker and her grandfather served as president of the National City Bank in Seattle and was the director of the Seattle branch of the Federal Reserve Bank. Side note, how come when you travel down the rabbit hole on virtually any topic, the same creatures are always festering down at the bottom?
Mary Maxwell doesn't appear to be related to James Clerk Maxwell or that other Maxwell family we've been hearing so much about lately. But some strong connections exist between them, nonetheless, as I intend to show. But first, let's get back to Bill Sr. How the hell did the son of a high school dropout end up marrying into an elite Seattle banking family? Families like that don't just accept anyone. But consider this. In 1890 and 1891, Frederick Taylor Gates was in the greater Seattle area mitigating business losses for John D. Rockefeller. He claimed in his biography that it was the happiest time of his life. He also said he made return trips to the greater Seattle area every year for the next decade. Some internet dot connectors find it significant that Bill Gates' grandfather was born in 1891. From there, it only takes a tiny intuitive leap to arrive at the suspicion that Bill Gates' grandfather might have been the bastard son of Frederick Taylor Gates. And then, everything falls into place.
I think people would say that they perceive Microsoft as always playing with both feet on the foul line.
I have no doubt that 100 years from now, he will be talked about in the same way that Rockefeller, and Carnegie, and Ford are talked about, as people who transformed an era.
The Pacific Northwest, with its resources and raw beauty, has long lured pioneers and visionaries. Among them was Bill Gates' great-grandfather, J.W. Maxwell, who founded First National Bank in Seattle. The Maxwells enjoyed their privileges and social position, but were never ostentatious. Their son Willard, also a banker, and his wife Adele, who had a passion for playing cards, were among Seattle's top civic leaders. Their only child, Mary, was a lively, intelligent girl who made a name for herself as a student leader at the University of Washington. Athletic and outgoing, Mary Maxwell was sometimes referred to as Giggles. Her drive and energy impressed everyone. Bill's highly respected and well-connected mother would come to play a pivotal role in Microsoft's future.
Mary served on a number of corporate boards as well as the University of Washington.
While serving on the United Way board, Mary Maxwell Gates developed a relationship with a fellow board member, John Opel, the CEO of IBM. In 1980, she convinced Opel to take a chance on her son's fledgling company, Microsoft. It was an odd choice for IBM to make.
We in the IBM company face the same challenge as you do, the development of real-time information systems on a corporate-wide basis for the 1970s that will enable us to plan for and control our business in the future.
IBM was then the world's leading supplier of commercial computer equipment, yet it chose to outsource the vitally important and obviously quite lucrative operating system software for its upcoming personal computer, the IBM PC, to a couple of geeky little weasels still in their 20s, Paul Allen and Bill Gates. And let's get this straight. Allen and Gates didn't write that software. They essentially stole it by paying $50,000 to a guy named Tim Patterson, who, in 6 weeks, had written a quick and dirty operating system called QDOS that was a blatant ripoff of the most successful computer operating system of the time, Gary Kildall's Control Program for Microcomputers, or CP/M. The genius move that Gates made, according to many, was to merely license the renamed MS-DOS to IBM, rather than sell all the rights. But it seems likely that Gates' genius was guided every step of the way by his father, the attorney. Nice to have one in the family, and bankers as well, when you're starting your own company.
This new technology made it possible to meet the user's crucial needs.
Pass me that lovely little gun, my dear, my darling one. The cleaners are coming one by one. You don't even wanna let them start.
A quick review of IBM's history with the Nazis might be helpful here. as a classic example of how eugenics programs intersect with the ambitions of amoral technocrats. IBM's chairman and CEO from 1924 to 1956 was Thomas J. Watson. Here's how Edwin Black, writing for The Village Voice in 2002, described what Watson was up to with his pal Hitler back when the Nazis were trying to take over the world. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, most of the world saw a menace to humanity. But IBM saw Nazi Germany as a lucrative trading partner. Its president, Thomas J. Watson, engineered a strategic business alliance between IBM and the Reich, beginning in the first days of the Hitler regime and continuing right through World War II. This alliance catapulted Nazi Germany to become IBM's most important customer outside the US. IBM and the Nazis jointly designed and IBM exclusively produced technological solutions that enabled Hitler to accelerate, and in many ways automate, key aspects of his persecution of Jews, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others the Nazis considered enemies. Custom-designed IBM-produced punch cards, sorted by IBM machines leased to the Nazis, helped organize and manage the initial identification and social expulsion of Jews and others, the confiscation of their property, their ghettoization, their deportation, and ultimately, even their extermination. Recently discovered Nazi documents and Polish eyewitness testimony make clear that IBM's alliance with the Third Reich went far beyond its German subsidiary. A key factor in the Holocaust in Poland was IBM technology provided directly through a special wartime Polish subsidiary reporting to IBM New York, mainly to its headquarters at 590 Madison Avenue. That special Polish subsidiary was called Watson Business Machines.
Hello, my name is Watson.
Thomas Watson's mania for new business alliances made him at least partially responsible for the first death camp tattoos, which were derived from IBM punch card numbers. As Edwin Black would later remark, that's how the trains to Auschwitz ran on time. With just a brief look at the historical precedents, the eugenics agenda of Bill Gates and his unseen superiors becomes clear.
We're planning to make full vaccination the condition of entry to nightclubs and other venues where large crowds gather. Proof of a negative test will no longer be enough.
What are vaccine passports and the forced injections they attest to, if not the new death camp tattoos for our digital age? The sorting demons are sure to go wild with them, shunting all the power, wealth, and personal freedom into one favored room inhabited by techno-fascist exploiters, while draining all the joy from the lives of everyone else.
Children, lift up your voice, lift up your voice. Children, rejoice, a train that goes to the kingdom. We're happy more, we're having fun.
to convince people and put them in a car and drive them and get that vaccine in their arm.
The anti-vaxxers are criminal at this point. The voluntary phase is over. Voluntary alone doesn't work. It's time for mandates because it's the only way to protect our people.
A rapacious system designed to serve the few should never inspire the slavish obedience of the many. But somehow, this one does. At least for now.